defense has been absolutely phenomenal. I think that's the biggest difference from last year. When you look at Damari Brown, when you look at Zachariah Poyser, when you look at Ruben Bain, like Ruben Bain is one of the best players in the country, if not the best. Like their defense on the edges, they have been flying. Their secondary looks really good as well. The biggest difference for me with this Florida State and Miami team, again, this was very similar to Vanderbilt and Alabama for me. This shows in the ACC a difference of power. This shows a solid team in the ACC compared to an elite team, a team that's going to be a national championship contender. And what I thought was the biggest difference as well, not only was Miami's defense flying, I mean, this was a 28, 22-point game where the score did not tell the story. Like, this was not a 28 to 22-point game. Florida State was never close. They backdoored and made it close towards the end. Miami had a sizable lead throughout this entire game. The difference for me, which made Miami to a different level of Florida State, is everybody wants to talk about Thomas Castellanos. I told you guys that my biggest issue with Thomas Castellanos when people were high on this Florida State team is his passing attempts. Like, he was winning these games with 14 passing attempts, 13 passing attempts, 10 passing attempts. I had doubts of Thomas Castellanos stretching the field against elite opponents. When we saw Florida State try to stretch the field multiple times for deep passes, what happened? It resulted in interceptions. I think when you have this style of offense where you have the ability to run the football with your running backs and you have a mobile quarterback, again, it's huge in college football. It's going to get you past a lot of opponents, but it's not going to get you past an elite defense that knows how to cover the edges. When you don't have to play where you have the fear of a quarterback threatening every blade of grass, where Thomas Castellanos couldn't do that in this game, we saw they were eating every time Thomas Castellanos tried to stretch the field. And you are just too predictable for a fast defense that is flying. That was the difference in this game. And then when you look at Miami, Carson Beck is playing like the best quarterback in the country. For me, I know there is debate, obviously him, Dante Moore, others. And I know Carson Beck doesn't get the widely regarded love as other quarterbacks in college football based on what happened last year. I think Carson Beck should be the top Heisman candidate for sure. I think he has been absolutely flawless. I think this offense really falls on Carson Beck's shoulders. I think he's playing way more free than he ever has. And for Carson Beck, he just needed to get out of that Georgia situation. We told you guys that's one thing that we were completely right on this podcast. We told you guys that Carson Beck just had to get out of the situation out of Georgia because he was getting scapegoated. Everybody had high expectations for Georgia. He had stretches where he turned the ball over last year multiple times, but he didn't have the weapons on offense that he has this year at Miami. And he was playing in the SEC, led them to an SEC championship, and people looked at that as a complete failure. This is a Miami team, in my opinion, that really hit on everything. When you look at how their defense is flying around, we just mentioned that. But even on offense, everything is panning out to them to the absolute ceiling that they projected it to pan out to. Like Carson Beck, this guy was supposed to be the number one pick in last year's draft. I am still very confident that this guy could be a better NFL quarterback than Cam Moore, than Shedeur Sanders, than the guys he was getting compared to. Again, a guy that could make every throw on the field, a guy that looks completely calm. And not only did Miami get this guy that has a ton of talent, they also got a guy that's been through every situation, that's been through every big game. The moment is not too bright for him. And then when we look at these Miami receivers absolutely shining, they hit on their receivers. Like, they have two guys at the receiver position that are absolute mismatches for almost any defense they play. When you look at Malachi Toney as a freshman, we got to put more respect on Malachi Toney's name because this is a guy that has 375 yards and 3 touchdowns in the 5 weeks in college football. We saw him against Notre Dame come up in a really big spot against Notre Dame, one of the biggest matchups they had in their entire schedule. Then against Florida State, he comes up again with 107 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looks completely explosive. Then you look at TJ Daniels as well, a guy that Mario Cristobal said that he had been wanting for years, a guy that has transferred out multiple times. We saw a guy that played at a big program at LSU, never really had this true opportunity. He looks phenomenal as well. He has 5 receptions for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. I thought, like I said, this was a game very similar to Alabama and Vanderbilt that was just a separation of two teams in a conference. You look at a team in the ACC in Florida State, a good team in the conference, and then you look at an elite team. That was a separation. And I think Miami completely made their mark. Again, I hope when they are making rankings, even though I think Miami is going to be a shoo-in for the college football playoffs, I hope when people look back on this game, they didn't back at it as a one-score game because it never was that. Carson Beck, the top Heisman candidate, in my opinion, a guy that's playing absolutely free. Miami has, again, along with Ohio State, really looked like they've been playing these games very easily. They did have a close game against Notre Dame, but they played South Florida. People had a lot of hype on going into that game. They beat them by 40. They played Florida. That game was never a game. Play Florida State, again, always had it in their control. Miami is going to be a national championship contender for sure. And a guy, Carson Beck, is really going to make people eat their words because he's going to lead this team very, very far. They did a great job surrounding him with weapons. And the biggest difference, like I said, Miami's defense was Swiss cheese last year, and this year they are a top defense in the country.